Good morning. Glad to see all of you here today. Welcome to all of you who are watching online. We are concluding today a sermon series that we began before Easter called the Cruciform Life. And during this series, we've been looking at the ways that the cross should mark our lives. We talked about the fact that our lives should be marked by service, that our lives should be marked by truth, that our lives should be marked by the hope of the resurrection. Last week we talked about the fact that as followers of Jesus, our lives should be marked by doubt and faith. Today we're going to talk and conclude this series thinking about the fact that as disciples of Jesus, our life shaped by the cross should be marked by love. Love. I love you. I love you. You remember those words? First time somebody said those words to you, or the first time you had to say them to somebody that was not your parents, remember that moment? I've shared before the very first time I told my wife Rita that I loved her. It didn't go the way that I had planned. We were dating. We were in college at the time, been dating for a while, and I decided, well, tonight's the night. This is the time I'm going to tell her that I love her. And so I made this elaborate scheme. I had a picnic ready in the trunk of my car. I picked her up. We were on the Milligan Highway. We were going toward the covered bridge in Elizabethton, which was our first date, which also did not go as planned because, let me just say, I had another picnic that night, and I was so nervous I couldn't eat it. And so I gave it away to some kids in the park. But I thought, okay, this is the place, right? This is the place where it started. This is the place where I should tell her I love her for the first time. So we're in the car and we're heading toward the covered bridge. And I couldn't wait. It's like, there's no way I can wait till we get there. And so I'm driving the car along this little twisty, turny, two-lane road there, Milligan Highway. And I look over at her in order to tell her these words I've been waiting anxiously to tell her, I love you. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't work up the courage. So I just went back to driving. Okay, you can do this. I'm trying to psych myself up. You can do this. Just look at her and tell her what you feel. So I looked at her again, tried to muster up the courage to say those words. But I found they became the hard words to say. So I just looked back at the road, kept driving, tried a third time to look in her eyes, and I saw lights dancing in her eye, and I thought, wow, if there is ever a time to tell a girl you love her, it's when the moonlight's dancing in her eyes. And then I realized, yeah, that's not moonlight. That's blue lights. It's the reflection off the rearview mirror. And I looked in the rearview mirror and there was a policeman pulling me over. And so I pulled off the road and he came up and said, son, are you drunk? No, sir. You've been swerving all over this road. What's wrong? I said, I'm just in love, sir. That's it. I'm just in love. And he walked back. He just let me off with a warning. He walked back and Rita looked at me and said, what was that about? And I said, it's about I love you, okay? I love you. Sometimes it doesn't go the way you plan, but maybe you can remember or imagine the pressure that comes with those three words. You're starting to get serious. The time is getting close. Someone's going to have to say those three words. The pressure is building. Who's going to say it first? And if the other person says it first, how should you respond? That's a pressure-filled moment. Because there's all kinds of terrible ways to respond when somebody says, I love you. Okay. That's not a great way to respond. That's terrible. Or they say, I love you. Well, that's adorable. That's not a good way to respond. I love you. I love me too. Again, that's not a good way to respond. I love you. Thanks. Not a good way to respond. I love you. I love cake. I love cake. See, there's all kinds of ways we can get this thing wrong. No pressure is worse than having when someone say, I love you, and not knowing what they will say back. Well, that's the moment in John chapter 21 that Peter faces. That is the moment. That's the pressure that Peter has to face. So, John chapter 21, we're going to begin in verse 15. This is the conversation with Jesus after the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And Peter was hoping this moment was not going to come because the last time he had denied Jesus just before. The last time he had seen Jesus was at Jesus' trial. And he had denied even knowing him. And now he's having a conversation with him. And Jesus is going to say those words. And Peter's not going to know how to respond. John 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time, he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. So let's rewind just a bit, and let's set the context for this conversation between Jesus and Peter. So the setting of the 21st chapter of John is the Sea of Galilee. Peter and some of the other disciples after the crucifixion had left Jerusalem. They had gone back home. They had gone back to fishing on the Sea of Galilee. They went back to business as usual, right? The comfort of ritual that they had known in their life. They returned to their old ways. They went back to fishing. But after they had been fishing all night and not catching anything, Jesus calls them from the shore, tells them to put their nets down on the other side, and they fill their nets with 153 fish. It might be in that moment, as they are pulling those nets that are filled, that Peter remembers his first encounter with Jesus. Because all of the trappings are present, the smell of the sea, his own boat, the overloaded nets of a miraculous catch, all of those things that echoed in his mind the first time that he met Jesus. Back in Luke chapter 5, we're told about that first encounter that Peter had 3 years earlier with Jesus. He and his business associates had been cleaning their nets by the Sea of Galilee after a long night of fishing and not catching anything. And as they carried out the task of cleaning the nets, Jesus asked Peter if he could use his boat as a speaking platform because there were so many people along the shore. He got in the boat with Peter. They pushed off the shore a little bit so that Jesus could be seen and speak to all of that crowd that was on the shore. And then when he had finished speaking, he said to Peter, why don't you go out into deep water and let your nets down for a catch? And Peter said to Jesus, yeah, we've just been fishing those waters all night, and we didn't catch anything. But because you say so, I'll do it. And he did, and there were so many fish that they brought in, he had to call another boat to help pull in all of the fish. And for the next 3 years, because after that moment, when they got back to the shore, Peter and the other fishermen left everything and followed Jesus. And thus began an adventure that allowed Peter to see things that no one could prepare him for. They saw the sick healed. They saw the blind able to see. They saw the hungry fed. They saw the dead raised to life. And in the last few days, they saw Jesus betrayed and arrested, tortured and crucified and buried. And on the night of Jesus' trials, Peter warmed himself over a charcoal fire, and 3 different times he denied that he was a follower of Jesus or that he even knew Jesus. And just then, a rooster crowed in the distance, a door to the court chamber opened, and Peter, gazing across the courtyard, saw Jesus, and they locked eyes. And suddenly the weight of disappointment just crushed the life out of Peter, and he wept bitterly. Shortly after that moment, a squad of executioners led Jesus to the outskirts of Jerusalem, stretched out his arms, and slowly killed him. 3 days later, Jesus left the grave, and he began appearing to many of the other followers, including Peter and the other disciples. But after that flush of excitement had passed, an obvious question arose among the 12 who had left everything and followed Jesus 3 years ago. What now? What now? And maybe Peter was convinced that because of his failure, he was disqualified from leadership. He was disqualified for being a follower of Jesus. So he returned to the familiarity of his fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, because there at least he had a rudder to help him steer through the storm, and where an honest day's labor earned a decent catch of fish. But after fishing all night, as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach and he called out to his disciples. Let's read the way John records that story in John 21, begin with verse 4. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. And he called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. And when the disciple whom Jesus loved saw Peter, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped in the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Breakfast on the Sea of Galilee. Peter and the other disciples had eaten with Jesus like this 1,000 times before. But the last time that Peter was around a charcoal fire like this, he had denied Jesus 3 times. So I'm sure that Peter is hoping Jesus is not going to bring that up, right? He's hoping, oh, this is an awkward moment. Maybe he won't say anything about it. I mean, a lot has happened since then. But when they finished eating, Jesus asked the question, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" Now, did you hear that? What does Jesus call him? Simon. Do you remember when Jesus asked his disciples about his identity earlier in his ministry? In Matthew 16, we're told this story. He asked the question, "Who do people say that I am?" "Well, some say you're a prophet, some say Elijah." "Well, what about you? Who do you say that I am?" Listen to this story from Matthew's Gospel 16, starting with verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So you're no longer Simon. You will be known as Peter." But here in John 21, we're on the shore of Galilee having breakfast, and now he's no longer Peter. "Simon, do you love me?" We're right back where we were before. We're back to Simon. "Simon," Jesus says, "do you agape me? Do you love me?" The word agape is the type of love that God has for us. Agape is the kind of love that pours itself out for the sake of the other. It's the kind of love that bears the burdens of another person. It's the kind of love that offers itself for another, that seeks nothing in return. And Jesus asked Simon, do you love me like that? Do you agape me more than these? Now, we don't know what the these that Jesus mentioned refers to. It could have been the boats, right? He's sitting at the charcoal fire. They're having breakfast. He may have gestured to the boats when he said the word these. Do you love me, Simon, more than these? There was a time when he had called Simon away from fishing. There was a time, Jesus said, when you dropped the nets and you came after me and you said you loved me more than your comfortable life, more than your profit, more than your business. So now, Simon, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than the money? Do you love me more than your comfortable life, than your security? Because now you're fishing again, so how about it? How about it? Do you love me more than these? Or he could have been talking about the other disciples. He could have gestured toward the other guys who were on the shore with them. Because there was a time when Peter said he loved Jesus more than all of the other disciples combined. I will never leave you, even if all of them desert you. I will never leave you, Peter said. Simon Peter didn't hang in there with Jesus till he died. He denied him. So now, Simon, do you agape me? Do you love me more than these, like you once said that you did? Do you get this moment? Jesus is sitting there. Simon Peter is close enough to touch him. He sees the scars in his hands. He sees the scars on his feet. He sees the scars in his head where the crown of thorns pressed down on his head. He sees what love looks like. And Jesus asked him the question, do you love me like I've loved you? Do you agape me? You have to respect Simon's honesty. We miss it in English because he changes the word. What Peter says is, yes, Lord, you know I'm your friend. You know I phileo you. That's a different word. Jesus said, Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me the way I have loved you? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I phileo you. You know that I am your friend. I'm not sure that that's the right answer, but it's an honest answer. I'm your friend. I'm not sure there's a worse response. Maybe you experienced that. You put your heart out there, I love you, and the person says, we're just friends. Peter, do you love me? We're just friends. And Jesus replied, feed my lambs. Now, I don't know how long it was before Jesus asked the question a second time. I would imagine that for Peter, it felt like years. Time seemed to stand still when Jesus finally asked the second time, Simon, do you agape me? Do you love me? And Peter's answer, yes, Lord, I'm your friend. I phileo you. Take care of my sheep. A third time, Jesus asked the question. He said, Simon, son of John, do you phileo me? In other words, Simon, are you even my friend? Finally, Peter had a question that he could answer. Yes, Lord, you know everything. You know that I'm your friend. But maybe he had forgotten what a friend really looked like in Jesus' estimation. Back in John 15, just before his crucifixion, here's what Jesus said about friends. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Are you really my friend? Yes, Lord. Feed my lambs. That's the moment that all of us come to today. Maybe it's the moment that you were hoping to ignore, that you wouldn't have to face this moment with Jesus when he asks you the question, listen, do you love me? Maybe you're hoping to not have that moment because you're wanting to, right? You want to one day to really love Jesus. You really want to lay down your life for him. You really want to love him the way that he loved you. You're fixing to get ready to do that. Fixing to get ready. There's a southern statement for you. I'm from the South. I know what fixing to get ready means. You know what fixing to get ready means? It means I'm not going to do anything. But I'm fixing to get ready to do something. That means you're not going to do a thing. And a lot of us in our relationship with Jesus are fixing to get ready to do something. But we're just not going to do anything right now. We're fixing to get ready to show our love for Jesus. But I'm just not ready to do anything. Maybe you think I'm just not at a place where I can honestly say, yes, Jesus, I love you like you have loved me. Let me get my life straightened out first, right? Let me get things in my life sorted out because it's a mess. It is a hot mess. Just let me get things sorted out. Then maybe we can talk about a relationship. Let me get my finances straightened out. Let me get this relationship that I'm in. Let me get it straightened out. And then I will commit my life to Christ. Let me get my life worked out. And then I will come and follow you, Jesus. And honestly, just between you and me, you're in the same place as you were last year when it comes to your relationship with Jesus. You're in the exact same place. You're fixing to get ready. But you haven't done anything. You're stuck. Because here's the thing about a relationship with Jesus. It doesn't start where you want to start. We want to start a relationship with Jesus after we get our lives figured out, after we get our marriages figured out, after we get our bank account figured out. Like after we get life under control, then I will start a relationship with Jesus. But a relationship with Jesus doesn't start where you want it to start. It starts where you are. That's where it starts. Right where you are. Right now. Even if you are in the middle of a mess. That is the place to start a relationship with Jesus. The best place to start following Jesus is simply where you are. And that takes a little courage, doesn't it? It takes a little courage to say, okay, this is where I am. It took a little courage for Peter to say, I'm not sure I can honestly say I love you like you have loved me. But I'm your friend. At least I think I am. It takes courage to be honest with yourself. It takes courage to say this is where I am. It's not where I want to be. It's not where I wish I could be. It's not where I intended to be. But this is where I am. And that's the importance of confession. We often think confession is about beating yourself up. But confession is about being honest with yourself. Confession is about owning it. Here's where I was. Here's what I did. Here's where I should have been brave and I wasn't. Here's where I should have kept my mouth shut and I didn't. Here's where I should have been obedient but I didn't trust you. Confession is about being honest about where you are. And in that honesty, you will know Jesus' forgiveness, because that's what Peter experiences. When he comes to the moment of honesty, he experiences Jesus' forgiveness. Some of you are deathly afraid that someone from your past is going to come up and remember you from your worst moments in life. You're afraid that they're going to come up and say, hey, weren't you that person who... If you've been honest with Jesus, if you have confessed, Jesus, this is where I am, if you've owned it, then you can say, yes, that was me. That was me. But let me tell you what Jesus has done in my life since then. This is where I am. And when you can say that, this is where I am, then Jesus will say, then that's where we'll start. So how do you know? How do you know if you truly love Jesus? Like, how do you know, really, that you love him? Many of us, I think, believe it's some kind of an intense emotional feeling that we get. If we truly love Jesus, we get all tingly inside, a little tear in our eye. I don't think so at all. If you want the answer to the question of whether you really love Jesus, then ask this question: how are the people around you doing? Do you love Jesus? Yeah, I love Jesus. Then are you taking care of the sheep? Do you love me? He asked Peter. You know that I'm your friend. Then take care of my sheep. Feed my lambs. So how are the people around you doing? That's how to know if you really love Jesus. If you're married, how's your spouse doing? Is their life better because you're in a relationship with Jesus? Because you really love Jesus? Do you love your spouse better? How are they doing? If you're a parent, how are your children doing? How are your friends doing? Not your Facebook friends, but those friends that you would call if you end up in jail. How are they doing? Those that you really influence. Is the work of Christ overflowing your life into their lives? Jesus said, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. So how about that guy in your office? How about that girl in your school? The guy that can break an anvil, you know what I'm talking about. That girl that can make it rain no matter how good the parade might be. Because sometimes when you love people, when you love the sheep, not every sheep is pleasant to be around. So if you really love Jesus, look at the people around you that's hard to be around and ask, how are they doing as a result of your love for Jesus? Do you love Jesus like he loves you? Well, honestly, no, not yet. But here's the thing about the Christian life. As Christians, we are born full grown. That does not happen in any other part of human life. In life, when you're born a baby, and you have to grow up. And one of the things about babies is how helpless they are at the beginning. But babies have to learn how to walk. They have to learn that somebody has to feed them, has to bring them food. They can't change themselves. Some of us have scars from learning how to walk when we were children. And the same thing is true for following Jesus. You don't start at agape. You don't start at, I love you, Lord, unconditionally. You don't start with, I love you, Lord, the way that you love me. That's not where you start. That's just too hard. You start where you are. You start with being his friend. You start by getting to know him. You start by spending time with him, letting the relationship grow. And a lot of us are paralyzed from moving forward in our relationship with Jesus because we think that if we can't agape Jesus, then we can't do anything. And you'll never get there. Because you have to start somewhere. And it's embarrassing to start, especially when you're full grown, because it's awkward. But you don't start full grown, fully mature as a disciple of Jesus. You start as a child, but you start. Do you agape me? No. Are you my friend? Jesus, you know everything. You know that I'm your friend. Then feed my sheep. Let's start right there. And remember, when Simon Peter was executed, this would have been about 30 years later, after this breakfast by the Sea of Galilee, about 30 years later, when they were going to execute Peter, because he was a follower of Jesus. They were going to crucify him just like they had crucified Jesus. But Peter told his Roman captors that he wasn't worthy to die in the same way that Jesus died. So they crucified him upside down. And can you imagine the moment when Peter met Jesus again after Peter was crucified upside down. Simon Peter stood in front of Jesus. And Jesus said, Peter, do you agape me? Peter held out his nail-scarred hands and said, yes, Lord. You know that I agape you. You don't have to start there. It's enough to say, you're my friend. It's enough to start right there. But start somewhere. And if you want to start today in that relationship and grow into the place where you can honestly say, I love you unconditionally, I encourage you. Let's talk about that. Let me pray with you about that. And as we sing this song, I'm going to invite you to that corner in the back. And let's talk about what it means to start right where you are and begin to grow in your love for Jesus. Let's pray. Thank you, O Lord, that you have loved us. You've called us your friend, and you have laid down your life for us. Help us to be honest with ourselves. Help us not to put on airs. And help us to move beyond fixing to get ready. And help us to actually start right where we are. Even if we don't have life figured out, even if we know that we don't love you the way we should, if we aren't as mature as we think we should be, even if our relationships are messed up, even if we continually find ourselves in disobedience and sin. Help us to start wherever we are, even if it is, I want to be your friend, and begin a relationship. And help us to grow more and more like Jesus every day until we can get to the place, even if it is when we meet you again in heaven, where we can say, I agape you. Help us to start wherever we are, even this morning, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.